You took it out of my apartment years ago. In California. Yeah, leave it go.
How did it happen?
She was walking and she was hit by a car with pedestrian.
Desiree. Which one?
Yeah, you know the area. Sorry.
I'm like, you
But yesterday or last night?
Yesterday,
I'm saying.
over midday, and then Chester. Oh. Wow. Dean and Rebecca.
Okay.
But yes, I think I can. I just don't know. I don't know what the different way to make it.
Oh, huh?
I just, and hopefully at some point this won't be,
Oh, I'm just teasing you, like, you know.
but it's always self-conscious because you're on.
I'm not really expecting you to change anything for us. I'm just commenting that, oh, new thing happening.
BAC. So.
Austin, you look so summery today.
Thank you. We go from the Hello, my name.
It's very sunny today. I'm really excited about that.
I just decided to go different.
You mind?
I stuck my cup under there too, just, you know, mine's on the other side, because sometimes you know how you stick your feet back. Feel free to slide it back if you need to.
I can sit right here is fine.
Okay.
Do you,
Oh, okay. That's great. It's not.
this bothers me, but I know they're doing this. Are you using power, are you on a projection today, do you know?
I don't think so. We're gonna send like.
You are? Okay, cool.
Yeah. Oh, yeah?
I was wrong. I see things now.
Oh, yeah, you have to kind of, yeah, approach
I
it.
see it different.
Yes. Yeah, no, it's different when you're sort of tracking down people like a variety, so.
Now I know, you don't have to walk in somebody's shoes.
Yeah.
Now I know.
Kim, is Chris back there?
Yeah, and you won't be counted for this one. Just to let you know, I caught on.
All right, that's good.
Okay. Call this meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee to order. We'll start with introduction. Mr. Perez-Radia.
Cameron Perez-Radia.
Thanks, Alito.
Felix Rivera.
Austin Davidson.
Forrest Dunbar.
Crystal Kennedy.
And then if we go down.
Travis Friss.
I'm at Dan Moore with Treasury.
Carl Roskowitz, OMB.
Great. And Mr. Constant is here, but he has, he'll be back shortly then. I believe Suzanne, are you online?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, so we have Suzanne LaFrance. Is there anyone else on the phone?
Mr. Peterson is trying to get a parking spot, so that's.
All right.
Did Crystal introduce herself?
Yes, she did. All right, thank you very much. So we're going to have a presentation from Alyssa Rodriguez, the chair of the Budget Advisory Commission, but she just in the last few minutes reached out to us and said she unfortunately couldn't make it today. So we'll jump right to item D, starting with the acting OMB director, Carl Roskowitz, so I pronounce it, okay? And yeah, Mr. Roskowitz, if we start with a discussion of the 2020 year-end budget actuals.
Okay, so before I start, I haven't met any of you, so quick introduction. I used to work for Dan for about 11 years as a tax enforcement officer, outside, basically outside auditor for specialty taxes. So on the 2020 year-end budget to actuals, OMB presented final budget to actuals on June 22nd, 2021 in Assembly Information Memorandum. Also on the same day, the Assembly approved the final budget appropriation. We don't expect any other changes in 22 budget. Okay?
Okay.
B,
Does anyone have any questions on the 2020 budget before we move forward? Who knows? Okay, yeah, let's go on to B, please.
Okay, so item B, we are presenting actual month, we presented monthly budget to actuals through March 2021, AM 108-201. At that time, there were no fiscal period closes, which would impact post depreciation and IGCs. The major differences between March and June are the following. So far, everything looks, we're in a mid-year. We look, the spending is 49.6% through mid-year, so it's as expected. CFO has a 15.3% lower spending due to timing of spend projected on ongoing examination of creating stormwater utility in Anchorage. And I'm just highlighting the major ones that I think that are in a variance of 5% or more. We have Equal Rights Commission. Equal Rights Commission is trending lower at 43.4% due to position vacancy. Information technology is trending at 40.1% due to timing of depreciation. This should become up to date once the fiscal period closes by controller is up to date. Then we're gonna go to maintenance and operation, which is also trending lower at 36.4%. This is mostly due to seasonality, because most of the spending occurs in the summertime. Then mud, 42.6%. Then we have management and budget. Is trending at 42.6% due to anticipating central service cost allocation plan.
Let's
Yes.
pause you there for a second. First, I want to note for the record, we've been joined by Mr. Weddleton and Peterson. Mr. President, you had a question?
Yeah, I'm just curious, you're reviewing something I can see. There's nothing that we're reviewing at this point. You haven't produced financials for us in any way that we're reviewing with you.
I've been at the job for 14 days, so I've been learning the job for 14 days. So if there is things that I need to supply to you that is part of the normal and standard procedures, please teach me and I will do it accordingly.
Yeah, no, I was just verifying. I mean, as you're going through the variances, we don't have anything to look at to
Right.
see those. So
I think this is going to be a process. We're all new to this. In the future, if you have some kind of, like, just what you're reading off of there, something like that, a handout for us, that's usually helpful so people can just go along.
Yes, so new administration, new things, I had to learn the job. And the ladies were updating as of this morning, so the expectation for the future that you will get proper documentation so you can run along. But I will give you the best overview that I possibly can.
Great.
Okay, so we left over, okay, so then we have mayor's office. It's trending lower at 40.6%, primary to office community grants not being issued.
And
Yes,
can I
ma'am?
add something?
Yeah, of course.
And us not filling positions. So when I was acting mayor, we left quite a bit of positions unfilled, and so the mayor's office budget has more than it typically would with an incoming mayor.
Thank you, ma'am. Through the chair, thank you, ma'am. Municipal manager is trending also lower at 11.2%. This is due to an accounting error that we are expected to be corrected by the controller's office. So, let's just move forward. I'll get Parks and Recreation is trending at 36.9% due to vacancies and seasonality, because most of work occurs in the summertime. Project management and engineering is trending at 40 3.6% due to seasonality. Public transportation is trending at 44.3%, likely due to timing of payment of invoices. Public administration is trending lower at 24.8% due to seasonality and position vacancy. Purchasing is also trending lower due to timing of contract spent. Traffic engineering is lower at 37.1%, very likely due to summer construction season. And last one that I want to mention is the convention center is trending lower at 14.5% due to timing of incremental payments throughout the year. Now I'm going to go to utilities, and I'll follow up on more details in a couple minutes. Hydropower is at 47.85% spent through the middle of the year. All are trending lower than 50%. Sewer utility 36.77, water utility 33.88, Aerofield 46.78, Port of Alaska 48.1%, solid waste disposal 30.67, solid waste refuse collection 42.11. At this time, these are preliminary amounts and ratios, and we are working with the departments to obtain more additional information. We'll provide a full explanation on the assembly agenda after periods closes. Please note there is no other department in excess of 5% overspent at this time.
Great, I'll note for the record, we've been rejoined by Mr. Constant.
Can we move on to the next item, C?
Yeah, and I'll just say for my colleagues, I put both of these on the agenda because, it's funny, we're in the middle of the summer, we have a new administration coming in, but it's already budget season, and I've already spoken with Mr. Retzkowitz about it. The budget process is already in full swing. And we have to be aware as they're building their budget, what we want to see and sort of the timing of the different meetings we're gonna have. And two of the major promises by the incoming mayor were that he was going to cut every department but the police by 5 to 8%, and he was gonna provide a 25% property tax reduction for businesses impacted by COVID-19. And so I've asked how that is being actualized and what the departments are doing and, what, if anything, they can share at this point.
So yesterday I sent out a letter on behalf of the mayor to all directors that the mayor is seeking department submissions of operational improvements, operational improvements in savings, not less than 5%. I'm going to read the statement just as a matter of record. The administration will consider all constructive and productive operational improvements. Department submissions should identify not less than 5% in savings, with an emphasis on efficiencies and effectiveness of government operations and streamlining services. All departments should strive to achieve an overall municipal-wide savings not less than 5% costs, while keeping core services intact to the extent possible. Submissions should include any possible service impacts resulting from the aforementioned savings identified.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Ms. Alto, then Mr. Rivera, then Mr. Davidson.
Mine's just a request, can we get the A and B charts emailed to us, please, that we review, because I think that's gonna be important as we look toward what you just identified, this idea of kind of refamiliarizing ourselves with where we're at into budgets. Thank
So
you.
did you hear that, Mr.?
Yep, A and B.
Yep, please.
Yep. And to clarify, Mr. Chair, how does that work logistically between you and
Send it to Desiree.
Desiree? Hi, Desiree.
Is that all, Ms. Alto? Thank you. Mr. Rivera?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So usually it's been the practice that the administration sends out the budget guidance to the assembly for us to review. Will that be sent to this body?
Since I am the most apolitical person on this administration, and I was just an employee, just like any other employee in the city, I don't have that answer for you at this time.
Okay, can you get that answer?
I will get that answer, and I will speak with the administration that you're expecting that answer accordingly.
Great, thank you. And if you get that answer too, if you give it to Desiree, she can distribute it to everyone.
I actually have one more.
Yeah. Mr. Gates, or is that in
I just
response?
missed Mr. Rivera's question. Can you say that again, please?
Sure, so the question was, will the administration be sending the assembly the budget guidance, which is something that is normally sent to the assembly? Then the second question that I had was, when proposing these cuts, I'm wondering if OMB will be able to, or I don't know if each director is gonna have like a specific format that they propose these cuts in. In particular, I'm interested in 3 areas for these cuts. What are gonna be the personnel impact? So are we gonna see a reduction of, let's say department has 50 personnel, after a 5% savings, they now have 45 personnel. What are gonna be the programmatic impacts? And then what are gonna be any possible operational delays caused by these savings? I don't know how directors are going to get these savings to the administration, but those are particular areas that I am interested in.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera.
Through the chair, I got those questions. I'll work on them.
Thank you. Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I had some similar questions to Felix, personnel impacts. Timeline, did the mayor give a timeline for departments to get back to him? And do you see there being a timeline, some back and forth between department heads and him? And when does the assembly get involved?
So through the chair, the OMB has very specific timelines. July 15th is basically puts us back about 3 to 4 weeks of a typical timeline when we should be working. We're expecting to have meetings with each department head to hear their story, to see what's going on, get an insight. I know the mayor is very open to hear what's going on in each department. That will be their opportunity to present their case. In the direction that I sent to all the directors, we expect for them to submit their proposals on August 6th. Subsequent to August 6th, we will start meeting with the department heads on August 9th. And the mayor will directly sit in those meetings to hear their story.
Great, that's really helpful. May I ask one more question,
Yeah.
Mr. Chair? What's the other question I was trying to ask? Oh, is this for all departments, including public safety?
All departments got that email, including public safety.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Mr. Chair, can I qualify?
Mr. Frisk, yeah.
All the department heads did receive the communication. However, I think it was pretty clear that the mayor has specifically said, that public safety was exempt from that proceeding, that we still want them to look internally to see if there is cost savings and particularly over time that might be reduced. But the primary objective globally is not less than 5%, and we're not anticipating very much from the public safety side, so it has to be made up some other in the other divisions and departments.
Could I ask a follow-up?
Yes.
So the bulk of our budget is public safety. So if we don't cut public safety at all, will you cut then much more than 5% from other departments to
Again,
make up the difference?
again, the objective is a not less than 5% globally. So we may have
Across the
some
board.
across the board. So globally, we may have a 30% reduction in one area and a less than 1% and another, the overall objective is not less than 5%. So to specifically identify one specific department will be decreased 5% or all of them will be decreased 5%, that's not realistic. So you just want to make sure we understand this is an overall global MOA reduction of not less than 5%.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think I had Ms. Alt on the queue and then Dean.
Yeah.
Go
Well,
ahead.
Mr. Father, want to
Yeah, go ahead.
quickly.
Mr. Gates.
Public safety can be interpreted different ways. Clearly, police and fire departments, but what was that perspective from the mayor? What do you mean by public safety? Was it other departments as well?
Through the chair, my understanding is when we say public safety, we're talking about Anchorage Police Department and Fire Department. That's the true thing, the two. So that's my understanding.
The prosecutor's office, for example, is not considered public safety.
I can't answer that question. It's always been in AFD and AFD is my understanding.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Alto, then Mr. Weddle.
Sure, comment and two questions. One, public safety without the health department is a lopsided stool that falls over and we really lose a lot of preventative programming. So I would ask for consideration about the health department considered at least some of their programs as part of public safety. Will the cuts per department include capital? Are we looking at capital impacts as well as operating? And then this 5% overall, how will that gel with revenue projections? In particular, I'm thinking about ML&P dividend, alcohol tax. If we're seeing kind of normalization or back to normal on, room tax, those types of things. What's the idea there in terms of balancing any increases in revenue against the cuts?
Through the chair, it's a great question and I don't have the answer for you at this particular point in time. The directive came out yesterday. Again, I'm on the job 2 weeks. I got a lot of areas to look at. And you're right, there is a lot of impact as far as will revenue return to previous prior COVID numbers and such. So there are moving parts. Will it involve capitalization projects and such? We don't have the answer. Basically, the department heads have been asked to review. I'm gonna go on a limb and say probably the biggest chunk for that will be personnel expense. And we've been instructed that if the department mows the lawn, you don't ask the guy that mows the lawn. You don't release them. Okay, so it's critical to keep all services that are critical to our city, but we're looking for efficiencies and savings and such. So if we implement a new computer program that allows us to reduce staff by 1, that's an efficiency, that's personnel expense. So we bring on a new capital project.
Can I put in an information request before we move on? So my information request would be, that any personnel cuts in particular be viewed in relationship to any planned attrition in departments as well, so that we can know if there is planned attrition or open positions that exist when we are presented with any suggested cuts to personnel. Thank you.
And you would ask a question about capital.
Yeah, and my understanding was he doesn't quite know yet if those will also include capital, particularly the capital improvement program and the capital improvement budget, because we will want to be informing the public, particularly the community councils, about any proposed changes.
Correct. Thank you. Mr. Weddleton?
Yeah, thanks. I just continuing on this vein. So, one thing, we're very familiar with cutting departments because we've cut them consistently for the last 5 years I've been on to move money to police and hold fire steady. But if you're telling your department heads to cut, show you 5 to 8%, that's too low, because if a third of our budget is not going to be decreased, it will probably go up because of inflation, CBAs and so on. You need to tell minimum on average 7-something% to make an overall muni-wide 5%. So I don't know, 5%.
To that response, I know that through my conversation with the mayor is that he is willing to listen to each department first. I think there's a learning curve also for the mayor to find out the details on what's going on in each department, how they function, and then present the budget for your approval. I know it might not answer your question, but anyone new on the job, they just don't know all the details all the time. I've been here almost 11 years, and what I've learned last 2 weeks, mind-boggling in many respects. So I think as time will go on, people will get smarter and,
Ms. Kennedy, and then John, you have a follow-up? Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you. Just a comment. I was just remembering one of the comments that Chief Schrage mentioned when we were talking with him at the Public Safety Committee. And he did mention something about the fire department's budget and how he felt like he could kind of rearrange some of the staffing needs at different stations. And he was looking at some of the focus areas of the different stations, and he believed that that was going to result in a great deal of savings in overtime. And so I think a lot of these departments will probably be able to do some of that too, and having, for some cases, having that fresh perspective of being able to look at potential savings. It doesn't mean losing a position. So I'm hoping that that's exactly what happens, is that they just look at things maybe from that different perspective, and those savings come about rather than just the idea of cuts. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. I actually have a question. So when he talks about a 5% cut, what's the baseline? That is to say, is it simply the 2020 budget? And if so, our 2020 budget and 2021 budget rather, very unusual because we have these new funds coming in with COVID and with ARPA, and we had a bunch of programs from the state was asking us to do. So I assume, a lot of those programs are going to end, but I'm assuming that's not going to be counted in this 5%. And then how do you sort of suss out which programs were as a result of the crisis and thus should not count against the baseline versus sort of ongoing expenses that are part of the 5% calculation?
well, basically the mayor's seen the budget for 2021. He sees a number at the bottom. He's looking at 5% plus no less than 5% cuts. With the COVID money and the special situation, it's a very good question. And I think the mayor needs a little bit more education on that as well.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Perez-Rodilla.
But just so I'm understanding what based on the question, he's at this point asking people to make a 5%, at least a 5% reduction based on the current budget.
That's the goal. To the chair, that's the goal.
Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Thank you. Just one more comment based on what Ms. Kennedy said that I was thinking about too. A lot of the overtime in particularly the fire department budget, it's been an ongoing issue that they actually not only use their entire budget, but then come ask for the assembly for sometimes millions of dollars extra that they're over budget. So actually, I hope our Chief Schrage is able to minimize the overtime, but even if he does, it's likely that budget will be hard to reduce.
Understood, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions on this topic? Okay. Mr. Ruskowitz, do you have any closing thoughts on C before we go on to D?
No. Okay, thank you.
All right, please go ahead.
So on the topic D, I don't have an answer for. I think it's more appropriate for the chief of staff or this city manager or the mayor himself to respond to that question.
Thank you. Desiree, was the chief of staff confirmed for this meeting? Did he respond? No. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Ruskowitz. Do we have any final questions for him? Although hang around because you might. Right. Madam Vice Chair.
Could I just request, since we weren't able to discuss this today, that a member of the administration that's prepared to speak to D could be here at the next meeting?
Yeah. Yes, to speak to it. But yes, that would be great. Okay, great. We'll move on to Mr. Frisk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to show you a really good job that ventriloquism because I'm gonna sit here and he's gonna talk. Obviously, being on the job for, well, as Carl had said, 14 days, coming up to speed and everything. These reports I did work with Dan on. I would like Dan to explain the reports to you in that there are some nuances there that he's very familiar with. I could do it, but I might butcher it a little bit, so it's better to go to a subject matter expert. So with that said, Dan, I'm gonna let you speak to the financial budget.
Okay. All right, thanks for having us, Mr. Chair, Assembly. So this is going to be taking a look at 2021 revenue for general government, and this is the first time we've provided anything in writing. This was a request from the last time. We really weren't in position to put anything in writing when we met with you last month because it was just too early. But at this point, we're halfway through the year, and we do have some initial information. It's still not complete by any means, but some significant information to share. I'll just highlight here that what we're talking about are the 100 fund revenues. These are the general government operating budget revenues. I actually throw some stuff at the end about alcohol tax. That's actually in a separate dedicated fund, so it's not part of the normal operating budget. But anyway, that's what we're going to focus on today. I cannot give you an overall projection for the year. It's just a little bit too early, but I'm going to go through highlights of different taxes and other revenues and let you know kind of where we think is it on budget, above or below budget. If you look at the top portion here that talks about overall revenue realization, this will give you some sense of where we're at, okay? So the budgeted revenues for general government operating budget, including the school district, is about $802 million, $803 million. So far this year in SAP, if you were to go in there and look, it's about $619 million of posted revenues. That's 77% of what we need to realize to make our budget. If you compare that same time period, the first, through like mid-July of this year, mid-July of last year we were at 74.5%. So we're actually a couple percentage points ahead of where we were last year. Now that doesn't mean we're exactly 2% above budget. It absolutely doesn't mean that. There's some timing issues there, but it should give some comfort that we are not seriously lagging behind what our budget realization would normally be at this time. So I'm going to start going through some of these revenues. I'm not going to go through it all in excruciating detail, so no worries there. The first two that are on here are the ones that were hit the hardest by COVID. They're seasonal, very much related to tourism, somewhat to businesses, and very, very hard hit. Both of them, room tax and rental vehicle tax, were down 57% last year from what they normally would be budgeted. So what I'm showing you here in these columns, and these are the same columns on each page, is I show you what was it actually at the year end for each of these, the year end actual number. What have we had budgeted for 2021? And just so you know, we did really try, we put a lot of effort in to try to adjust 2021 for some type of assumed recovery from COVID. The general assumption for these two revenues, room tax and rental vehicle, is we would be about halfway recovered in 2021. And I'll comment on kind of how we're doing on that right now. The actual postings, if you looked in SAP, are really small at this stage. And you go, how in the world can we be halfway through the year and have such small numbers? Well, typically, and this is like real history prior to COVID, we would get 14% of the money for room tax by this time of the year and 9% of rental vehicle. 70% of room tax revenue comes in Q2 and Q3. 80% of rental vehicle comes in Q2 and Q3. So, and unfortunately, these two are quarterly taxes, and they do not come to us until early August. So, we can't tell you, we're about 3-4 weeks away from actually knowing what was Q2. Q2 is a big quarter. Q3 is even bigger, okay? So, but we do have some good information on room tax. Do you want me to pause there or just finish?
Yeah, we got a question from Mr. Peterson, and I've actually got a question as well.
Sure. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if you know this or not, but the price of renting a car is way up from what I've been told. And so like 400% or something. And so is that going to increase the amount of tax that we collect?
Absolutely.
And then, so have you projected that anywhere?
We did not anticipate that type of price increase when we proposed the 2021 numbers. So That is something we're being very, very keen on when we look at the second quarter data that comes in. We have a bunch of history here where we compare to prior second quarters, and we will know within a few weeks how that's panning out. We do expect both room tax and rental vehicle tax to be above what we were planning on having this year. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second.
And one additional note is that there's also a shortage of rental cars.
The demand side is huge.
They might offset each other a little bit, so I'm
Right,
not sure.
Yeah, but they're also making it up through Turo and some of these other online platforms, which fortunately we do have registered. So that's another, we have Turo, Outdoorsy, RV Share, and that's in the rental vehicle. And then we have VRBO, Airbnb. I mean, it's very, very good that we can get to these other areas, because otherwise we'd be losing out on quite a bit of money, so.
Good thing we passed those ordinances.
Yeah. Thank you.
I have a question before we go to Mr. Hine.
I don't need to.
Oh, you're good? Okay, great. So when you say 12% realization, and I understand that, it'll go up, but it was 14% last year. So it's 12%, but based on an assumption that there's only a 50% recovery, right? So it's 12%, but based on a baseline that's a lower number than 2019. Is that right?
Yeah, and I should have explained, the 12% is basically what's posted in SAP versus what was budgeted.
Right.
And what was budgeted already accounted for an assumed recovery. So.
Assume partial recovery.
Yeah, partial recovery, halfway or
So
something.
it's a lower number. We're still going to come in, we think, better than 2020, but probably still under 2019. Is that correct?
Correct. Okay, so I'm going to keep going. I'm going to talk a little bit more about room tax. So one thing that the Assembly did a number of years ago is they actually required a municipal code that the major hotels report to us monthly, okay? So we actually know what happened in the month of May. And we don't have all the hotels. I mean, I think there's 20 or 25 that would be required to report. We have about 15, but the really big names we have. And there's a huge variability here. I mean, you have, and I can't give you specifics, that's confidential, but you have some very big name hotels that had virtually zero room sales the first, half of last year, and they're just going through the roof this year. You have others that are more what you'd expect traditionally, very large hotel. It's exactly halfway recovered, okay? But they managed to stay in operation, you can tell by their numbers. So when I look at the month of May and I see for the 15 that we have, how does it compare to where we thought they would be based on this adjusted budget, the halfway recovery, versus how it's actually coming in? And it's coming in about 6 to 8% greater than we thought it would be, even with a halfway recovery. So I believe the demand for rooms, and the rooms are a static number, there's no shortage of rooms, they're out there, and the price is up also. So that, and I think Alaska's position in terms of our vaccination and just other things, I think we attracted people to come up here. So it is looking quite strong. And the one thing to remember about room tax is it's the single largest revenue we have other than property tax. However, general government only gets to keep about 40% of it. The other goes to the convention center and to Visit Anchorage. And so it's a really big number in normal years. I think in 2019, it was the grand total was like 32 million, something like that. But the city's portion is 10, 12, 14 million, somewhere in that range. So if I were to project what I think based on May, it could be $600,000 to $1 million more to general government. That's very, very rough. Okay, I'm just trying to give you some sense of how positive that is. Rental vehicle tax also will probably be hundreds of thousands of dollars additional revenue beyond what we budgeted. So those are two really good things happening, and those are good signs. So I'm going to keep moving here so we can get through. The rest of the pages here, it keeps going through the taxes, and then we get into some other types of revenue. The tobacco tax is always up and down, always. Very, very tough to predict. The budget's set around 20 million. We do expect, it's actually very normal in terms of what its realization is at this point in time. So we have no reason to expect it won't meet budget. Sometimes based on year-end purchasing of these distributors, we can be off $500,000 or $1 million. So it's very good, very close to budget. Marijuana tax is an industry that continues to grow. The demand has been strong. I mean, I think COVID actually spurred more demand. So we actually, there's a number of taxes that we have that are not quarterly, they're monthly. So we actually have 5 months worth of information here on marijuana, and it is coming in strong. And in the column, second to last column, I say at least $300,000 of additional revenue is expected from marijuana. And I am being very conservative. I don't want to get ahead of myself on these revenues, but it is looking quite strong. Aircraft registration tax, this one is very small. It will be, actually, the way it's budgeted is budgeted to be phased out, because if you remember, you exempted the personal use aircraft. So that particular line item, actually in the future, there will be no tax on personal use aircraft for individuals. There is the commercial portion that shifts to businesses. So.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Constant.
So we've recently had some more outreach by some of the commercial operators that are still chafing over this question of why did we shift all of the tax burden to the commercial operators and completely exempt the privates, because they're using the operation as well. And so it certainly raises the question of did we go too far, and should we contemplate going a little bit backwards to make sure that there's some fairness and equity in our approach to taxing. So is this a conversation you guys are having upstairs at all?
We've had lots of conversation about this in the last couple of weeks. The numbers here are very, very small. We're talking $100,000 of revenue. So there's not a lot of burden being shifted to anybody, okay? When we did that omnibus proposal, the theme of that was to shift away from individuals and focus on businesses for mobile home, for aircraft, for other things. And that is when we talk about efficiency, that is much more efficient to go after 472 businesses with aircraft versus 2,000 individuals with aircraft. So, and we have a very, very old tax system. As you know, it's decades old. That system, the aircraft component, works very, very poorly. So in order for us to go to this new system, we had to think of a new way to do it, and that's that fee methodology. We are open to lowering those fees. So I think that's really the main part of their issue is how much tax. But the actual equity issue is, it's so small, it's not really it's not a real issue. We are fundamentally required to tax businesses, whether you're a pizza shop or aircraft owner. We have to tax businesses. We exempt mobile home, now snow machine, boats, all those types of things. Those are exempted, and this just brings that into the fold. So it's a much better efficiency for us to focus on businesses. And with that, we will probably cut a position. But there's a trade-off. You have to change your way of doing business in order to be able to cut a position.
So it raises the question, if we've completely taken the burden off of all of those folks, 2,000 users, as opposed to the 400, whatever number you have that are the commercial operators. And I hate to suggest this on the fee side, but isn't there some rationale then for adopting a flat fee for private plane owners that would be kind of a payment in lieu of taxes, and that would at least provide for the ability for us to say to the commercials that, hey, we're not just targeting you, this is generally speaking a cost of doing business of the airport.
The money does not go back to the airport, it's just area-wide revenue. So it's just contributing to the cost of city services. Trying to keep track of 2,000 individuals is very, very challenging. It's been a huge headache for us forever. So we really hope to go away from that.
So are you suggesting if we have a large class of people who just decide to make it hard to collect from them, that it's worth us letting them not be charged?
No, but if you put in perspective here, we're talking $100,000. Okay, it's really not much of anything.
It isn't to us as a city, but I would imagine 2,000 divided by 100,000 divided by 2,000, probably then.
We did the calculation. The median will go up $25. Okay, so we're talking really, really small dollars. There's no big, huge impact on any particular business. We're extremely modest with that fee schedule. So and then the rates that the private play, they've never changed in 25 years. So if we were to inflation proof the top rate 125, it'd be $203 today. So we're not even talking about going that high. It's going to be in the 120, 150, 175 range is what we're currently talking about as a revised fee schedule. So we have been very open to them. we're contemplating going down on the fees. We haven't landed on the final schedule. We'll have to come back to the assembly to revise those. But the actual methodology and efficiency, that's kind of on our side to like say, this really makes the most sense. The aircraft industry doesn't really know our operations, so.
Okay,
So just last note first, that I just suggest that we had an email that said, or I did at least, that we are potentially gonna lose businesses to places that don't have such.
And we looked into that too.
And so is it are you able to speak to that, or should we hear from Ralph on that?
Travis has looked into that directly,
so,
so.
Mr. Chris, you want to speak to this?
Well, yes, I'd like to, through the chair, I'd like to address some of the concerns you have. I think part of the issue is that there was a massive amount of miscommunication on the impact that this would have. I met with several operators that were under the impression that every airplane that they had as a commercial operator was going to be charged $8,000 per plane. And that's not the case. When I sat down with a specific vendor out there at the airport that has 20 planes, we determined that his tax would go from $1,500 a year to $2,900 a year. And that's based on the old plan of, $1,000 being the top end. Again, we're still working with those numbers, trying to make it palatable to everybody. But I think there was a big amount of miscommunication to the commercial operators. Now, that's addressing that question. We have looked into what would you do receive FAA funds for a certain amount of activity on the airport. The number the criteria is in order to be eligible for a $10 million FAA grant, you have to have 10,000 enplanements, which is one person getting on and off an airplane in an annualized basis. According to the numbers that Ralph provided to me, criteria is 10,000, and last year we had 21,000. Okay, so, and it's only commercial. It is not the private plane operator or an owner that comes in and gets in his plane and flies out to Big Lake. So there is room there per se that if an operator did move off the airport, it's not going to be, we would have to lose approximately 55% of our operators off that airport in order to get below the criteria of qualifying for the FAA grant. To the flip side of that is that, to my knowledge, there is a waiting list of operators to get on the airport. So I get the concern that there could be $10 million in jeopardy here, but I'm not convinced that it would actually happen with this increase. When we are talking, for example, a flight school that has an impact of like Dan said, maybe $45 to $50 per airplane that they have, and they're running a fleet of 25 planes, they have to raise the cost of an hourly rate by approximately 7.5 cents per hour in order to absorb this. It's not a significant amount of money. The other thing that Dan said that we really need to catch is that the cost of having one individual chase down 2,475 people is roughly about $100,000 with the benefits package included to gain $168,000 in taxes. It is not beneficial and efficient to do it that way. And then the last piece is the new program that we're bringing on for taxes does not have the ability to tax individuals. It only has the ability to tax the business entity. So I've asked Dan that question, and I asked the IT people that question as well. Can we make an adjustment? What is it? It would delay the rollout of this program by over 6 months. It would cost us an additional $40,000, I think was the number. And we still have to retain the individual that's on staff at $100,000. So it just doesn't make sense from an efficiency standpoint to do that. I understand there's consternation about an increase, but as Dan also said, they haven't had an increase in 25 years.
Okay, so
Last note,
I think we need to move on.
1,500 to 3,000 in taxes is actually a substantial increase. I don't care how you shape it, it's 100% increase. So.
1,500 to 3,000.
No, I know, it's.
Okay, I thought you said 15,000 to 30.
I'm sorry, 1,500 to.
So,
Yeah, I get it.
Mr. Weddleton, Ms. Zalato, and then I'd like us to move on to keep moving forward.
I will try to not go long on this though. But if we were to change the tax rate on the planes, I think we should go for fairness and equity. And they should pay on their means of production, the same property tax that every other business pays on their means of production, which would be $1,800 per 100,000. Do your math for $1 million plane. They get such an unbelievably good deal. You should just be quiet and say thank you.
Fair.
Fair. And I've made this clear to every.
We're across the comic book shop over there. So,
Thank you. Actually, when we started talking about upgrades to the tax system, I would definitely like an update on that. It is extremely dissatisfying to hear that we can't do something with the new tax system because for the 2 years I've been on the body, we've heard that the tax system wouldn't let us do things and therefore we couldn't do things. So if we're implementing a new tax system, I guess I'd like to learn a lot about its forthcoming limitations. Because that was kind of a big piece to this is that it wouldn't have limitations. So an update in the next month or coming months would be very helpful. Thank you.
Can I respond to that, through the chair? This is Del. What I'm saying is, I misspoke. It can be accomplished, okay? But it's gonna cost $40,000 and it's gonna delay the overall rollout of this program by at least 5 to 6 months, which when you start putting hard numbers on that delay, as well as, again, having to retain the individual that does this for all the individual claims, it's just not efficient to do the change.
And my request is broader than this particular change. What I'm
Okay.
saying is it highlights that there may be some more limitations to CAMA that we are unaware of, that I would definitely like to be aware of and how those intersect with the issues we've identified.
And we're totally prepared, Mr. Chair, to provide that. And it is a very strong system. We have been able to put it, we always envisioned doing something different with aircraft. And that a year ago, we knew we would have to do something different. But it's really to try to fit into their system as opposed to them fitting into our old system, which was very broken. So we're just trying to fix that situation. So anyway, but we can definitely give you the update. And they cost, Travis said $40,000, it's actually $400,000 of the IT costs because it also delays the mainframe going offline. So anyway, all right, so I'll finish. I know we're running short on time, so.
we actually have enough, but
Oh,
yes.
okay. Oh, okay, good.
Yeah.
Darn.
But everybody, it's a beautiful day out, so.
It
yes,
is really nice out there.
Just move with all deliberate speed.
Okay, sure. So I'm halfway on a second page, motor vehicle excise tax. This one is expected to meet budget. If you look at just the percentage, you say, gosh, it looks like it might be trailing a little bit, but there's a lot of seasonality here. There's a lot more driving in the summer months. So we expect we will be on budget for that. That did get hit pretty hard by COVID. Auto registration tax actually has been very, very stable even through COVID, and we expect it to meet budget. Private PILT is primarily the base housing, Aurora base housing. However, if you notice, the budget went up a lot, and I have a question out to Marilyn and OMB. I believe this is probably a direct result of the MLP sale, where I think we're down $7 million on MUSA, and then private PILT went up $10 million. So I think it's all related to MLP, but I'm trying to get that confirmed.
So in other words, something that we used to own is now in possession of Chudiad,
Right.
and they've agreed to pay us.
And they're considered a private entity instead of a municipal utility.
Sure.
Okay, so that's private PILT. Municipal assistance, we got very little money last year. The budget did come down quite a bit. It's only at $1.7 million. I just put to be determined. I honestly don't know what the outcome is. So that could be completely at risk as far as I know. Real property tax, you'll see that we are at 94% realization. That's because when we bill real property in mid-May, that is our biggest, that's 90% of our property tax. As soon as it's billed, it becomes revenue in the system. So we're very much on track there. When I look at property tax, penalty and interest, that whole collage of property related revenue accounts for real property, we expect to be on budget. So that's really good news because that's a big one. Personal property is on the next page. This is the second largest revenue source for the city. And the budget is basically set at a flat level. This one is to be determined. I will find out tomorrow what the initial what I call the timely rolls are for rolls 2 and 3. And I will know how it's looking in terms of making budget. This one can vary quite a bit, even in a normal year, probably plus or minus $1 or $2 million. It's just a hard one to predict. Businesses come and go, inventory changes. There's just a lot of variables to this one. APD counterfines, you may be interested. I don't know if you all drive and have seen the police cars, but they're out there. They're stopping people. The number of citations issued is up 32% for the first half of this year. What the police department told me is that they have a lot more than usual grant funds, and they've been able to do that, and they actually expect to continue to use grant funds in the months forward. So it is way ahead on the volume. These are what they call a counterfine. So these are the ones that are voluntarily timely paid by people that receive a citation. So I think very conservatively, at least $300,000 is positive variance. The police department will tell you it's never about revenue, it's about safety, and me too. I want safety. I really am happy to see enforcement going on because I wasn't seeing it for a while. So it's good. It's very good. PFD revenues, I know Travis, I think, responded to the chair on this. This is our biggest threat here. We don't know what's going on. We do know we budgeted $4.2 million, right? So I think technically at this moment in time, it could be zero. I think it was going to be maybe halfway of last year's dividend. It could be last year's dividend, it could be more, I don't know. But this one is the biggest impact. Now, these PFD revenues also tied directly back to the police department. They're not treasury revenues. We collect on behalf of them, but they go back to the police department. So this is up to a $4 million shortfall.
Just a real quick caveat, the response went back to Chair LaFrance. She asked the question, not Chair Dunbar. So I just want to clarify that. And the response was that we won't know numbers until the legislature gets done with their process and sets their budget. The other particular point, and I know you guys all know this, is that we're about 6th on the pecking order of first right at any PFD. So, and it all depends on what the PFD level is. So again, we budgeted on $1,000 PFD similar to the previous year. So, but at this point, we don't have an answer for you on that. Thank you.
All right, ambulance service fees. This is a largest single revenue for the fire department. This one, just on the surface, looks like it's tracking perfectly where it normally would be at this time of year. However, every quarter the controller division does adjustments based on collectability. And we're looking into if they're caught up on those adjustments or not. My guess is they may be a little bit behind because they've been trying to close the year with the financial report. The last one mentioned on this page is the cash flow earnings. This one is very volatile, it always is. The markets this year for fixed income have been in negative territory, not huge negative territory, maybe minus 1%, in that area. However, it does directly impact our cash pool. And so the current projection, this is as of just a few days ago, is $958,000 below budget. So right now I think the budget here is for this year 1.4 million, so it was already brought down a lot. But we're only going to make maybe $500,000 of that 1.4 million. So that's where it is now. Things could change, but it's going to be probably overall a fairly tough year for the cash pool, and I think that was expected when they brought the budget down in half. The trust fund, this has been a very, very positive story. When the ML&P sale occurred, the trust fund's value was $388 million. That's with the sale proceeds. That number now is $433 million. We've also paid out $15 million of a dividend. We have gained in the trust fund on market value $60 million since the end of October. It's just huge. We've also been able to fund some of these new managers in private real estate and private credit with money that just came from the market. So it's been terrific. There is a formula built into Municipal Coverage, the Assembly approved. It caps the payout rate at 4.5%. And so based on that formula, and it's marked at March 31st of every year, we already know what the dividend will be for this year. It'll be $18.8 million. And we've paid out $15 million so far. So we paid out 80%. We tried to get some of the frothiness of the market while it's been really up at high points. And so we're in good position on the trust fund. The last two here are building safety fund. This is an autonomous fund. Everything they make, all their expenses keep within that fund. We are reaching out to this department and other departments to kind of get more information about how they think the revenues are going. But if you were to look at this time last year, they were at 54% of their budget. Right now, they're 62%. So it's been quite strong so far this year. But again, it's, to be determined if some of these permits end up, happening all the way through like they planned.
Thank you. Mr. Constant?
Thanks. So you were just speaking about the trust and revenues and how good it's doing. Of the revenues, how much should we budget for the year for revenues out of the trust?
Oh, it's on here. It's the second column, 18.7.
So we've already budgeted 18.7. We are anticipating to receive 18.8. So
Yeah,
we're right on
correct,
track.
correct. Yeah, in just 2 years, it was 6.5. So it's triple. It's triple what it used to be, which is really great. So, yeah. Okay, alcohol revenue, retail sales tax revenue. This one is tracking about $1 million per month in revenue. We are at 106% of where we thought we would be at this point in the year. That's about $200,000 ahead. So it is looking very strong. The budget is $11.8 million. So we expect to meet or slightly exceed budget. And there is some seasonality built into our projections. So we got what we're seeing so far shows a slight bit of seasonality, but really the heavy seasonality will be in the summer months. So that's why we think it could actually exceed budget. So, and that's all I have.
Madam Vice Chair.
I just wanted to quickly compliment you on this
Okay.
estimate. I mean, really, you just said.
Yeah, and that was a
Credit for
former
it.
staff person that was amazing, and
Yes.
he amazingly good at projecting.
Yes.
And I'm very relieved to look at month by month. It's like everything's tracking. So yeah.
And he's no longer with us.
Now after 15 years, he retired.
Moved to Las Vegas.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, any other questions for Mr. Moore? Yeah, very, very well done. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Moore and Mr. Frisk for the wise delegation. So is there anything else then from you, Mr. Frisk?
Other than the fact, I think Dan's presentation was pretty thorough, and we have discussed the impacts of COVID-19 on the revenue and how we're seeing rebounding, but obviously not to the level of pre-COVID numbers. And that's just to be expected. So as we go into 2021, we're not going to, from a budgeting perspective for 2022, let me clarify that. We're not necessarily going to go and say, okay, let's go back to 2019 budget numbers because COVID's, vaccination rates up and everything, COVID's starting to come down. However you want to review that. I think what we're going to do is at this point, look at the 2021 and put an intellectual guess and projection that we will continue to gain, but it would be foolish to think that we're going to go right back to 2019 numbers. So I would anticipate budgeting higher numbers, but not all the way back to the 2019 budget.
Thank you. Actually, I have one question on that. So how, if at all, when you're building the 2022 budget, are you going to account for the second round of ARPA funds, ARPA funds?
I'm going to be able to answer that question right now.
All right, any other questions? Oh, Mr. Rivera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as is typical custom for the CFO to be asked during this time, do you know where we are with the CAFR? Is it still on track to get here by early August?
The answer to that, Chair, Assembly Member Rivera, sorry. It is on track to come out in August, but we're finalizing some final, just minor comments to the CAFR, and then we will publish. And we anticipate fully that it'll be available the first week of August.
Okay. Are there any big surprises in it that we should know now?
I have not completely gone through it at this point. I've been just trying to help and help by staying out of the way and letting the controller do her job, which she does very well, and just giving pieces of information to her as she was preparing it. I have not actually reviewed it, so I cannot talk to it at this time.
Look forward to it in August then. Thank you.
Mr. Frisk, thank you. Mr. Trainee, sorry, Mr. Rivera. So we, and your presentation, We had asked Mr. Morris to come and I completely received a response. Obviously, the operating funds for mass shelter topic has sort of changed now. The COVID relief funds, the idea was, we were getting updates from Mr. Bockenstead about the spend, basically, the spend of the CARES Act money, the spend of the ARPA money now. Desiree, did we ever get a response? Yeah. So we did not get a response from the chief of staff. Hopefully we can reiterate that is important and have those folks show up next time. Ms. Zolotel and then Mr. Rivera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I put a question in actually to the municipal manager this morning about who's administering the ARPA funds out of the municipality. I've had a couple of grantees want to make contact. So when I learned that answer, I would be happy to share it with members, but apparently there are grantees who are working either with Mr. Schutte or someone, and they kind of got lost in the shuffle. So I think we need to really work to make sure we keep that continuity to keep that moving.
Yeah, that's wonderful. If you were able to share those answers with the clerk and she could distribute it to everyone, that would be ideal, or with Desiree.
Sure.
Mr. Rivera?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I came prepared today with a series of questions, hoping that Mr. Campbell would be able to respond. If members have questions in the interim, should we just wait until next month, or should we see if Mr. Campbell can provide responses via email and then send that out to the body?
I think sending an email, who's to say? He hasn't responded to us. I would say if you send him an email and if you do get answers, please relay them to Desiree and she can get them to all of us. I think everyone would appreciate that.
Can I speak?
Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just wondering from the administration's perspective, is Mr. Campbell the correct contact? Who should be our point of contact on CARES Act and ARPA funds? Because we need to have a contact, so who should that be?
Well, I've had these discussions to the chair. I had discussions with the budgeting, and they're still trying to get the bottom of the story, because there was a first half and there's a second half when we expect more money to come in. And per Maryland, we still need to investigate it. As it relates to the point of contact are you asking point of contact regarding the ARPA funds?
Yeah, so we're aware that there are two
Right,
bits of money,
right.
right? This body,
Right, right.
that wasn't there appropriated all of the money for the first batch. We know a second batch is coming. For the first batch, there were a bunch of programs that like Ms. Salatar alluded to that we want to know, are those programs happening? Where are we? Where's the money right now? So who should be our contact for that information?
So this morning I reviewed the funds that were part of the emergency orders and assembly orders of the remaining funds. But the contact as it relates to that, for the ARPA and COVID, I think ultimately will go into the CFO, if I'm correct.
I can't answer the question at this time. I would say that for the moment, until further notice, I would say Chief of Staff Campbell would be the point of contact until we'll get the answer. But right now, let's just keep it as it is listed here as Chief Greg Campbell.
Okay, and if you could maybe let us know
Yeah,
before the next meeting, so that if members have
I will get you that information on who your point contact on ARPA funds going forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we have Mr. Peterson, Ms. Kennedy, and Ms. Kennedy and Mr. Constant. Mr. Peterson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And last time I had communication with Chris Schutte about this, about the distribution of ARPA funds. He said they were running them through the purchasing department, and that seemed to be possibly where there was a delay being caused, because I mean, it was a long list, $51 million that we were trying to distribute, on top of doing everything else that the purchasing department normally does. And so some of the people that I spoke with that were waiting for funds were still waiting. And so maybe we can, if that's still the case, maybe we have to temporarily transfer some personnel in there to see if we can get that sent out. Just an idea. Thanks.
Through the chair, Mr. Peterson, I don't know what the mechanics were previously on how these funds were distributed. as one of the things I'll do. I'll look into that process. Obviously, it's green, it's money in my wheelhouse, so I'll ask the question. And if there's a more efficient way of distributing without delays, then we will obviously try to find that. So that's my commitment to the assembly members, is that I will try to find a better method if there was previous delays. And I will come back to you in a month or when our next meeting is, I apologize, to give you some answers at that point. As far as the point of contact, I should be able to get that in the next day or two. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will pass. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Mr. Constant.
Yeah, so if for some reason the body doesn't want to wait another month to get answers to this question, this is a pretty important question, we could host a work session that would be hosted specifically for the purpose of hearing from the chief of staff if he's the point, or you if they delegate that to you sometime in the next 2 weeks to get this question on the table and out in the open. So if we want, I'll wait to hear a decision from the committee chairs, but
Well, yeah, that makes sense. Ms. LaFrance, are you still online?
Yes, I'm here, Mr. Chair.
Did you hear what Chris said, and are you open to doing a work session on this topic if members want it?
Absolutely, yes.
and Suzanne will be gone for a couple weeks, and we have some time slots in there, and so we can make this happen, or we can wait for you to get back, Suzanne.
Thanks. Yeah, whichever works.
Wonderful. Okay, so moving on to item 4A and B, does anyone have any legislative priorities or budget items for 2022 that they would like to discuss now? Mr. Presvedia.
Yeah, I don't have anything brought forward, but I just want to sort of plant a seed that I'm particularly interested in our internal auditing and wanting to sort of investigate the idea of whether we need to the sort of auditing schedule and whether we have sufficient staffing to be able to do enough auditing. So it's a conversation that I want to have with you guys, but I just wanted to put it out there that's an area that I'd like to consider potentially looking at increasing the whole auditing capacity.
Mr. Chadwick, do you have any thoughts on that?
And I intend on talking with you about this, so I just want to show it up there. But.
Sure, we'll take any extra.
Great. Mr. Rivera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, happy to have that conversation with you. I will say, I think it was last year, we actually had to cut some audits from the annual plan because there wasn't staffing to complete all of the audits that we had wanted. So we're the conversation to have.
Ms. Zalatow.
But not on audits, so,
Yeah.
okay. So on budget items for 2022, I'm gonna be very interested to see the reconciliation of the proposed cuts and the reorganization that the municipal manager has mentioned. I believe during our confirmation hearing, I raised this issue when we reorganize and add more executive level positions. Those are usually higher and paid positions. So I'm really going to be interested as you move through presenting the budget to us to have that highlighted, how the reorganization impacts the budget and how it's reconciled with the proposed cuts. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatow. And actually that reminds me of another question I should have asked back under B, but the 5 to 8% cuts per department, was that sent to Desiree as well for the assembly? Or we're not a department, we're a branch. And then was it also, is the mayor's office expecting also to do a 5 to 8% cut?
All the directors received the same email, so I'm not sure if Desiree received it, but I will forward it to her.
Perhaps Barbara received it?
No, we don't get the director guidance. I mean, I have a copy of it now, but you're not directed that way.
Right.
But
Thank you.
to follow up to your question, the mayor's 5%, their office also received that email.
Thank you.
Yep.
Wonderful. Okay, well, if there's nothing else, is there anything, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Eugene.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yep, my fault. This is my first time chairing a committee in a year. Go ahead. Does anyone, any audience participation? Anyone from the public? Mr. Carl Haberman.
Eugene Carl Haberman. My name is Eugene Carl Haberman. I represent myself, follow the public process. When the public process is done appropriately, decision made by the governing body is more like the public interest. For the record, I don't think anyone but me is here as a member of the public in this room. Everyone else appears to be elected or government officials in this room. So for the record, so people cannot visually see who's in this room, just me for the member of the public. Number one, what I was hearing is a presentation on the finances and the expectation of certain taxes, revenue, and what's come through. But I call into account a question as how they come up with these numbers, because what news reports have been reporting for some time is the difficulty of businesses finding employees. That has been a handicap. And then also in reference to the room tax, the hotel scenario is, are they fully occupied? Do they have workers in there that can handle it? So how can you come and say, we're going to expect this revenue, and that picture doesn't look like it's that great for the businesses out there? Also on the rental, as experiencing the scenario with the rental cars is a problem. I don't know what you are, but I'm out there and I'm seeing the scenarios of dealing with these businesses out there about dealing with car fleets availability and all that stuff. And even a person's on the road trying to get a vehicle, you're darn lucky if you can get one. And then the fact that tourists come up here, are they going to get a rental to travel around and spend money up here? These are things of collision course that we are experiencing here, but it's not just in Anchorage or throughout the state, it's across the country. So when you come up and make statements about this is what we see, I don't see you really putting in account the true picture of the economic situation that we're slowly moving out of COVID, hopefully. And the ramifications some of this is dealing with, like the manufacturing of cars and so forth. So I call into question those finances and expectations. And also, how can the city or other government bodies expect and know what the true picture of what the state's going to be providing in revenue? And one should not expect that. And moving out of COVID, if we really are, I question that. But the fact is, the scenarios that local governments and the public has been receiving monies because of COVID, and my standard statement is that what I witnessed during this past year is the money's coming in, but the reality is this is one-time money. If it wasn't for COVID, these monies would not be here for us. So you need to operate with the understanding about the true factor of what the finances is. And my time is up according to my timer.
Thank you, Mr. Haberman. Anyone else? Okay, with that, hearing's adjourned.
I sent an email. I sent you an email.
Just now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.